But my philosophy is very simple. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, say something, do something, get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble.
Strength and solidarity. The strength and solidarity. Divided is our nation, combating and fighting hatred. The mission, should you choose to accept it, is fighting racist. Psychology is just a space where we run in our simulations. We load you up with the tools, then we plug you into the matrix. So have a seat on the couch, now tell me your situation. Take a look in the mirror, be honest, just who you facing. Marginalized as a youth, what challenges were you faced with? Feeling you wasn't equal, told that you wouldn't make it. Your ID isn't real, got you constantly trying to fake it. Hiding behind masks in the closet till you can't take it. Getting harder to breathe, someone choking you on the pavement. Unspeakable violence attacking you cause you Asian. Accomplices we accomplish through collaboration, engaging, educating, evaluating one another, liberating the future of all our sisters and brothers, empowering, elevating all communities of color. Strength and solidarity. The strength and solidarity.
The Strength and Solidarity podcast is a conversational piece that invites scholars, community activists, leaders, artists, and entrepreneurs to discuss their work as accomplices in cultivating cross-racial ethnic solidarity. Hosted and produced by Pooja Mami Dana and Dr. Dana Demanari, our podcast team also includes our podcast interns, Alexis Rios and Petra Zabroga. The Strength and Solidarity podcast strives to engage, educate, evaluate, and empower communities of color one episode at a time.
Our guest today features Dr. Jeannie Celestial, who is an associate professor in the PsyD program at the California School of Professional Psychology at Alliant International University in the San Diego campus. Dr. Estrellato's research areas examine race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender identity in trauma therapy. Dr. Estrellado's scholarly interests connect multicultural psychology and trauma psychology, with the goal of providing quantitative and qualitative evidence for effective, culturally informed supervision and training of graduate students. Dr. Estrellado was a leadership fellow with the Asian American Psychological Association and an alum of the Minority Fellowship Program with the American Psychological Association. Dr. Estrellado runs a private practice dedicated to trauma recovery and is also a consultant to the a-VEL-u-kuh program, a federally funded anti-violence program serving the Jolla Band of Luiseño Indians.
Hi, Dr. Jan. Thank you so much for being in our podcast today, Strength and Solidarity. We're really happy to have you here today.
Really happy to be here with both of you. Thank you, Pooja.
So we'd like to just begin, if you could tell us about your journey towards becoming a clinical psychologist.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. It's I like sharing the story because it's a non-traditional kind of path towards psychology. And so I hope that for potential psychologists, future psychologists, sometimes we don't always see ourselves in the non-traditional path. We most frequently see a more traditional path. So I started out in counseling and counselor education more specifically. And so with that program was at San Diego State called Community-Based Block. I'm very proud to be an alum of that program because it prepared people to serve diverse communities who are from those communities. And we sort of taught each other as students and colleagues, we taught each other how to work with each other's communities, which I think was a really powerful experiential educational opportunity. And so after that program, I went into student affairs. So I did residential life, and I worked at the LGBT Center at UC San Diego for a number of years. And, you know, I was doing racial justice work there within a larger LGBTQ plus community. But what I saw were a lot of students who were struggling with mental health concerns. And as a student affairs professional, you know, our scope is important, but it's limited in terms of being able to address students who are struggling with mental health. And so, you know, maybe I think 8 or 9 years after I got my master's degree, I went back to clinical psychology. So this is a second profession for me, and one that I think incorporates a lot of my previous experiences with racial justice work and work with the queer and trans community. But it was a non-traditional one. You know, I was not a psych major. I was an ethnic studies and sociology major, and so I kind of came into psychology not having a traditional kind of psych undergrad degree, previous research experience. I had lots of professional presentation experience, but it was kind of a different one. So that's kind of where it led me to clinical psychology.
Nice. Were there any challenges along? I'm sure there were.
Yeah, you know, the biggest one that I think we talk a lot about in the Asian American Psychological Association, especially with the Graduate Leadership Institute, yay, and the Leadership Fellows Program, yay, that, you know, one of the big challenges is that if you don't come from an academic pedigree, where your mentors' names are well known, or that their research is specifically on Asian American psychology, that it's kind of it can be a challenge to find your place, I think, and to find pathways to community and to leadership. And so I think that was probably one of the biggest challenges, was feeling like I had something to contribute, but not really knowing the path to do that. And I think my mentor is a very well-respected trauma researcher, Connie Dollenberg. So I think she kind of helped create a path for me in the trauma world, which was a very wonderful gift. And I didn't have, you know, the path that I also wanted, which was to be with other Asian American psychologists. So it took me a little bit to get there, but I think I eventually got there.
Yeah, because I know that it can be pretty exclusive. You know, if you don't know, you know, the big names in psychology, then yeah, you're kind of excluded from that club.
Right. And, you know, many of us, I think, even if we are in those pathways, there are different reasons why it might be harder for us to reach the leadership pipelines. You know, like I would say my queerness and transness is not something that's not my queerness and transness. Ooh, let me catch myself. Let me see how many times I catch myself today for talking about internalized oppression. You know, that systemic homophobia and transphobia would be barriers to you know, leadership or whatever it is that I was trying to find. And so I think you're right, Donna, that there are many barriers, and some of them I think can be cumulative.
Right.
Where we see so many of our colleagues who have so much to contribute to our field and so many important things to say, but feel like because they weren't mentored into it, or because they didn't show up at the right meeting, or they weren't in the right research lab, that they don't know how to arrive, or how they can arrive at some of these different places that we know about through some of our different commitments. No.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned internalized oppression, which is a great segue to, you know, plugging this awesome book. I don't know if it can be seen. Yes, it can. Love this. By the way, I'm going to need, you know, all 3 of your signature. Like, yeah, I want the autographs.
Sure.
The book that you, good friend Lou, Felipe, and Ate Jeannie Celestial, Clinical Interventions for Internalized Depression. Like, this is a much needed book, much needed, and about time that we have something like this.
Well, thank you. we felt the same way, and we were, talk about sort of like, again, I feel like we should do like a ding, ding, ding or something for every time internalized oppression comes up, because, Jeannie and I, when we first started thinking about this, we had doubts. The first reaction was surprise. Like, why doesn't a book like this exist yet? And, we have been big fans of E.J. David's work for a long time. And the part that we saw that we were hoping to see was really how this looks in a clinical environment. When you are in that the therapeutic session, when you're in a health provider session, how might this actually look? And thankfully, EJ was so supportive, and Sumi Okazaki has been very supportive of us being able to do this. But our first reaction was surprise. Why hasn't this been done yet? And then the second one was question mark. Are we really the ones to do it? And so I think that's even in the process of trying to identify how this book gets done and by whom. We're still battling the same processes, I think, that we are writing about.
Right.
So the process felt very kind of congruent, I think, all throughout.
Yeah, and that is, it seems like it's this lifelong battle that you have to constantly, bring awareness to, because it's so automatic, it's so ingrained and automatic. Right. For many of us,
Yeah. I was thinking about what I was going to share today, and I had this memory that that you both might relate to in some way. It's possible, but I want to get your opinion on this. I had a memory from I was like early elementary school age. I must have been maybe 5 or 6, and my parents are immigrants from the Philippines, and my brother and I were the first generation that were born and raised in the U.S. And we grew up in Northern California, in Sacramento, and we did not grow up around a lot of Filipino families. It was mostly white families, and it was a middle class kind of upbringing. And I remember sitting at the dinner table with my dad, and he was eating with his hands. And probably up until about that age, I had also eaten with my hands. It was just kind of like what we did in our family. And as soon as I entered school, so I was probably a year or two into school, I remember, I feel like I have some feelings about this even as I'm about to say it. I remember not poking fun at my dad, but judging him for eating with his hands. And it was why would you eat with your hands? Even though it was something that I had at that young age grown up to do. And I remember the look on my dad's face. I think it was embarrassment. So I think he and my mom kind of had a quick conversation about it, and then he started eating with a fork. I almost never saw my dad eat with his hands after that.
Wow.
And interestingly, I had probably stopped eating with my hands, soon after also. And the reason this came up is because my daughter, who's 7, was eating with her hands. And I said, hey, you need to eat with and I was like, ooh, maybe that's not what I want to teach her, or at least to teach her that there are options that are equally valid. Right. I feel emotional talking about it because, I feel, my dad and I don't have a great relationship, and I do not like that I caused him that pain, but that pain didn't start with me, and it didn't start with him. Right.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you shared that with us and our listeners. So thank you so much. One thing I love about you is from the first moment I saw you at AAPA is just how authentic and genuine you are, and you just always keep it real with us. And we need more people like this in the world, in clinical and in academia. So just wanted to say that. But I've had a different kind of experience because I was born and raised in India, and we have a lot in common within our cultures, the three of us, that, we do eat with our hands. And it's very different when you eat with your hands than when you eat with a fork. The food doesn't taste the same. But
That's right.
The interesting thing is it was reversed in my home family because my dad moved to the US when he was 20. So I've never seen him actually eat with his hands. But I've always eaten with my hands just because of like elders in my family and things like that. It's so interesting that you mentioned this because I moved to the US when I was 23 for my master's in MFT. And I remember like while I was at home in US, like my dad had cooked something and I was eating with my hands, and my dad is like, "You're going to college now here. You might want to think about eating with a fork and not eating with your hands." And I looked at him and I'm like, well, like, first I was like, what? Like, what just happened, right? And then I was obviously 23 then. So I was like, no, I was like, I'm going to eat with my hand wherever I am. And if people have to look at me, they'll look at me. And, that's what feels right to me. And the funny thing is, I don't just get that from my dad. I also get that from my brother, who kind of, says the same stuff to me, similar to like my father. But I'm so happy that, and when you spoke about that it comes from somewhere, it also comes from, that acculturation where you're being exposed to two different cultures and you're trying to make your own and trying to figure out like, what you want to do. And back in that day, if you did eat at hand in college or in school, we all know what would have happened. Even if you wanted to, it's like you were protecting yourself, right?
Yeah.
Not to kind of deal with that. And I'm so happy that when you saw your daughter eat with her hands, you were like, hey, like I want to let her know that there are options out there and she can decide what she wants, which we would not really get in our generation of parenting. Just like not because our family does it in different ways, but I think the beautiful thing about each generation is taking what we have from our family and then understanding how do we do this for our future generations or like, our children, things like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like I'm a big fan of different kinds of informed consent. I talk about this with my supervisees. I supervise an ACT clinic on our campus. And, this, I feel like that with parenting, it's like, I don't think I didn't know that I had choices. I just knew that I had feelings and then I responded to them. Like I had the feeling of embarrassment watching my father do something that I thought was wrong or I thought was less than or less civilized or whatever it was that I had at that early age. I mean, I was only 6 or 7, 5, something like that. And I already had that very strong sense of like how we were different at home than how we were at school. And so the idea of something like informed consent in that case to me is like for my daughter, say, hey, look, this is where she's multiracial, right? She's Filipino, Japanese, Native American, and white. And so she has, different traditions to really draw from here. But I want her to know that some of her people will have eaten with their hands, and that's the way we do it. And that like she can choose, like she probably would get questions at school. You're right, Pooja, even at elementary school, for some versions of eating with your hands, right? Sandwiches are fine, but something like rice would not. And so I love the idea that as parents that our kids have different opportunities because we can talk to them about choices and about intention and context in a way that I don't think I got.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that experience in terms of I don't even know where it came from. And as a child, because I was 3 or 4 years old when we left the Philippines. And we lived in Madro, Marshall Islands. I don't know if anybody's familiar. Oh, you do? Awesome. We lived there for several years. That's where my childhood was for the most part. And it was just something that I realized, and I don't know where it came from, but I realized that if I spoke only English, if I, abandoned the language that I grew up with, which was Bisaya, people will value me more. And that was reinforced. Like, minimizing my Filipino-ness, reinforce, like, you know, like the way that people approach me, like, oh, you're so cute, you speak very good English, you know. So that reinforced, like, oh, so, you know, having that less you know, route to kind of have, you know, being further away from your culture of origin, you'll be more valuable as a person. And that was, yeah, that was the thing that I had as a kid.
And you're right, Donna. Like, I don't think anyone had to tell me eating with your hands is wrong. You know, like, it's just what I saw, and I saw different kinds of, you're right, different kinds of rejection of who I sort of more naturally was. And that happens around queerness and transness, certainly, also, you know. And so I had lots of different messages that I think I tried to navigate the best way that I could, without really having a school environment or a family environment or a community environment to, like, talk about those things. I mean, I think what ended up happening, you know, by the time I was a teenager, was, wow, there are all kinds of things that are wrong with me that I have to try to hide or downplay or move away from, or, you know, mask in some way. And so I'm glad that we got to learn about my daily diaries here.
Well, I really appreciate that, though, you know. I mean, we're being real, right? We're being real, and that's what makes this podcast different.
Yeah, and you know, even earlier when you kind of shared that, when I asked you that question, like, how did you become like a clinical psychologist? I liked how you said, you know, it wasn't a traditional route for me, and it doesn't have to be a traditional route. And I think that's the issue, you know, with the field of academia, that, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that. And it's like, no, like, there's a different path for everyone, and we want to embrace that difference. And I think, honestly, those differences, even though with the ways our identities intersect, it's caused a lot of internalized oppression, or, like, you know, things we've had to deal with. But I also truly believe that that's our superpower compared to, you know, others in the field, or like things like that.
I actually wanted to do pick your brain a little bit, because I was reading E.J. David's, one of his 10,000 million articles that he's written. Because in one of his articles, he mentioned using the term appropriated racial oppression as opposed to internalized oppression. Are you familiar with that?
Somewhat. So I've just started reading about this myself in the last couple of years. And so I'm more familiar with the term. I think there are some, well, let me say sort of about language broadly, you know, and I think, like, queerness and transness have really taught me valuable lessons about the power of language, right? And so I feel like as soon as I came out, when I was, I don't know, 20 years old, in like 1998 or 99, somewhere around there, as soon as I came out, I was already outdated, you know, in terms of, like, I think I identified as a lesbian, and, you know, and then my language to describe myself has changed over the years. And so I feel like queerness and transness give us great models for how language changes and needs to evolve over time. So that's kind of my first thought, is like, you know, I'm always happy to consider other ways of describing particular experiences or constructs, because we get better and better at it. And so that's my general take. But I mean, you know, more specifically, appropriated racial oppression seems to kind of have a maybe a wider scope than internalized oppression alone might cover. You know, I was reading some work by Versi and colleagues in 2019 about moving away from internalized oppression and towards appropriated racial oppression.
Yeah.
And I like the idea that people who experience oppression might respond in ways that seem like they might be about internalized oppression, but might actually be more adaptive. Something like code switching, different kinds of code switching.
Yep.
And I appreciate that thought because I think that's true. I don't know that it would be accurate or effective even to say that my evaluation of someone else's behavior is bad, because it's always going to depend. It's always going to be in context.
Right.
So I appreciate the term for that reason. In that same article that I was reading from Versity and colleagues, they also talked about the impact of racism on white people, and just how we would look at the impact of sexism on men, etc. That there's this whole other dimension to the consequence of racism that we do need to look at. Which I appreciate. It's not the particular focus of our book, but I both are needed, right? Both the impact on people who experience oppression and the people who benefit from a particular power dynamic.
Right. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that perspective.
Absolutely. Okay, so the other ding we need to do is how many times can I say absolutely? I think I'm saying
I love
maybe
it.
3 or 4 times.
I wasn't even paying attention to that.
Oh, really?
No.
I noticed it immediately. I was like, I think I'm going to say that a lot.
Dr. Jan, you're allowed to say whatever you want to. So
Thank you.
Yeah, you are.
Ding, ding, ding can be how many ever times.
I agree.
Thank you.
We're here to have fun.
I could talk about this. I did check my calendar and said, is it only an hour? Because I really feel like I could talk about this for a long time. We don't have more than an hour.
We can if you want to.
No, it's okay. It's okay. But I was like, oh my gosh, I really feel like this is so interesting to me, and hopefully interesting to your listeners that, it'd be fun to talk about for longer at some point.
That learning can be fun.
Especially when you are using different platforms to kind of do that, and also being thoughtful and intentional about the way you're delivering that message, right? Even through your book, as soon as it came out, Dr. Donna also reminded me that the next conference we have, I'm also going to bring my copy so I can also get a signed copy. So thank you. And
that's awesome. Thank you.
Of course. And I'm the TA for my intercultural awareness development class. And I actually recommended this book to my professor because, something that I've noticed in my MFT program, which I did at the same school, and in my PhD program, where much of the literature is kind of outdated, and, we need to keep up with what is happening in the world right now, just globally. Right. And also, if we're talking about communities of color, I think it's also important to understand teaching that from a person's of color's perspective and bringing those different nuances that come with that. So I just wanted to say that we've incorporated into our curriculum at school, and
That's awesome. I love hearing that, Pooja. And there are so many resources that are coming out now that do feel more updated, more relevant. I love hearing about the more recent trends with racial trauma, which is something that I'm also very interested in, and that we have models for what I think many of us knew in some of our lived experiences, but to see academia kind of catching up feels like what our graduate students are learning is hopefully more relevant to what is true for them, and for the people for whom they will work, with whom they'll work as future psychologists and mental health practitioners. And it looks bad on our profession when the standard for our training is outdated, especially around multicultural issues. And so I think for faculty to stay updated, because there are so many good things coming out right now that it's an exciting time in our field, and I think our students are responding to that. in seeing themselves more in more of the curriculum.
Yeah, I quite agree with that. Can I take a moment? I think we all have Alliant ties in this Zoom room right now.
Ooh, yes, let's discuss.
Because I graduated from Alliant in Fresno, the Fresno campus.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's where I got my PhD. And Pooja is currently in San Francisco, Pooja?
Yeah, I did my MFT and currently in my third year
Yay!
in my PhD. Yeah.
That's so exciting. Yeah, so I graduated from the San Diego PhD program and now teach in the San Diego PsyD program.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I came back.
Your students are definitely very lucky to have you.
That's very kind, my friend. Thank you.
Oh, anytime, kaibigan, anytime.
Yeah. students and your supervisees also.
Thank you
that's
so
right.
much.
Yes.
Also, I'll have to file that away in the. I have an actual feel good file in my email because some days I need it. So I'm going to file this away in my mental feel good file. Thank you.
You definitely need to. I know what you mean. I have a journal like that.
I do. I know I'm going to need it someday, and I do. I pull it out at least a few times a year where I'm like, you know what, this is. I am not feeling it today. What's going to help me like move through this situation? It's like, oh, I need reminders.
Listen to the podcast.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
As a plug.
Love it.
So Dr. Jan, we know you've done we're going to switch gears a little bit. We know you've done a lot of work on, the reservations, and we'd kindly like you to share with our listeners, how did that begin, and what does some of your work collaboration there look like?
Sure. So I work for the La Jolla Band of Luiseño Indians, and they are in Southern California, between like North County, San Diego, and Riverside County. And that work was somewhat happenstance, and I am so grateful for sometimes just how things work out. I was asked to do a presentation for the Indian Health Clinic on working with LGBTQ young people, and it really kind of strengthened a relationship with Wendy Schlater, who's the chairwoman currently of their tribal council and also the director of the Avellaka program. And the Avellaka program is a federally funded anti-violence program through the Office for Victims of Crime to protect Native women and children. And I think the idea is really that in order to do that, to accomplish that goal, one would need to heal the whole community. And so the model that we use there is by providing services on site, mental health services on site. And, I am very aware that my role there is that I work for Avellaka through with the tribe, and that my work there is there's a lot of unlearning and relearning that I've had to do, I think, working there and trying to be as effective as I can be there as a person who's not from their community, and who, again, it's very clear to me how much of our training has been helpful in some ways and also very limiting in other ways. And it's a chronic exercise in relearning and unlearning. And so I'm really grateful for for the opportunity that Wendy and the Avellaka staff have given me to be there and work with their community.
Yeah. I feel like once you start working with communities who are outside of that, cishet Euro, community, a lot of our training is very limited.
Absolutely. Oh, look, I think that was the fourth time. Um, there it is. Yes. And I think that's, like hopefully, I could say with great certainty that if I wasn't doing what it is that they've asked me to do, I wouldn't be there anymore. And so me still being able to be there tells me that I'm being more helpful than not, and that there are so many places where we can do things differently, but our field holds really, really tightly, to certain standards and quote unquote standards and ways of being that that aren't universal.
Right.
That many of our students, I think, are asked to accept as universal. They're just not universal.
Right.
One of the best examples of that for me is, I cognitively know that everyone's relationship to their family is contextual and culturally informed, et cetera. I know that, that's true for me as well. And yet, I think the concept of like boundaries, let's say, is different if the frame is, I am not myself unless I am with my family. And so like boundaries look different in that framework than it would where it's like, self first and then relationships or and then family. And so it's a very different way of, like if you're going to do like an assertiveness intervention and you're only using that one frame that we've all been taught in graduate school, which is a very sort of individualistic one.
Right.
Then we will fall flat on our face because we're using the wrong frame. So I'm not saying like every Native group uses that frame, not at all. I'm just saying that there are groups that will have a different conceptualization of self and family. And we're not really taught how to adapt what we do, I think, to those kinds of contexts.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
There it is. Yes, it's contagious.
It's contagious.
But, I also think it really also speaks to our presidential theme of the task force, like what you're doing at the reservation and what you do outside of the reservation too, where how can we increase cross-racial ethnic solidarity and fight racism and, be better accomplices. And that's exactly a beautiful example to show that doing work just doesn't start with your own community, but you also need to be an accomplice for other communities of color, other marginalized communities, and how can you show up and be there for them? So I'm really happy that you shared that and that you're doing that. And thank you.
Thanks, Pooja. Can I add something there? Because you sparked
of course.
A thought. So one of the things that I've really, and I was working at Avellaka while I was also working on the book. And one of the things that I think was really impactful for me while working there was like my own sense of like loss around my own indigeneity, and that, colonization has taken many, many things from many, many people around the world. But one that I hadn't really sort of emotionally accessed was that I don't, my last name isn't really even my last name, and that there is a whole world that I don't know about. I'm feeling emotional about this. That was taken from me, the opportunity, and thinking about this in the context of like being a queer and trans person, like there is a history there, I am sure, that I do not know and I don't have access to because of multiple instances of colonization. So I think that that's part of the, when you talk about like cross-racial solidarity, it's that our histories are tied together in one way, shape, or form, and that when we move beyond these models that we've been taught about how things quote unquote should be, that we find these connections that are really powerful and impactful. And I hope that when people do find whatever path they are supposed to find in terms of like how moving beyond internalized oppression and moving towards, liberation and liberation focused models, that we get to find that. And I think cross-racial solidarity is necessary in order to do that. I can't, it cannot happen in a vacuum.
Yeah, I agree.
No, I'm really grateful that you shared that, and please share whatever you want to share, because you're absolutely right. And as I think something we all have understood just in our own different subjective ways as a student of color navigating these white spaces, we constantly feel that, right? That we're learning something that's been taken from our cultures or been taught in a different way, and we're just supposed to sit there, and it's really hard. And but even within that history, there's a lot of like commonality within that history. So it's also important to be able to understand that for each other and within our communities. And I know you've done a lot of research in the field for like graduate students of color navigating predominantly white spaces and the nuances that come with that. And, just in my many years of education, I don't believe graduate programs prepare BIPOC students for the power dynamics that come into play in clinical supervision. And how do we navigate these nuances? So could you kindly speak on what does culturally informed supervision and training for graduate students? What should they really look like, or what can they look like?
Mm-hmm. I think the chapter that I wrote with Jeannie Celestial in the Internalized Oppression book really affirmed for me that not only can we be doing much better, which I think most of us could probably acknowledge is true, but really thinking about what some of the models are that might help us do this better. And one of them is, so I teach the supervision seminar in my program, which is like, it's definitely in the top 2 classes that I love to teach. It's really fun for me, and I get to teach it every semester. So I feel like I get lots of good practice at learning and relearning this with students every semester, which is supervisors. There are so many steps to becoming a clinical psychologist supervisor that I think by the time many of us get there, we somehow feel like we've arrived, which is true in some ways, but I think in other ways, the model for supervision in the psychology field is that somehow supervisors should not be continuing their own sort of like self-awareness journey. And, that I think as we get reinforced for having different kinds of power as we move throughout our careers, that it probably becomes less common practice to really own our mistakes and really sort of acknowledge our missteps, or, really kind of acknowledge that our student bodies will always tend to be more diverse and will bring more ideas than I will have as a supervisor. So I think there are many opportunities for supervisors to change their practice. And I hope that the first way for most supervisors is going to be, wow, let me be more real with myself and with my supervisees about my mistakes and about my limitations as a culturally responsive person. Because that work, as we know, it's inevitable that we're going to make mistakes. So when supervisors aren't able to model how to own a misstep, or how to model that their supervisee is bringing up something that maybe they haven't thought of before, or that supervisors aren't always right, I think if we can flex our model for how supervisors function, then I think our supervisors will take our cues from that and then be able to do that when they are in their professional practice of psychology. So, it's not uncommon for me to say during my own group supervision, you know what, I think I made a mistake there. Let me see if I can move back a little bit and think this through. Or I will try to give my students a window into my mind and say, I'm not sure how to answer that, because on the one hand this, and on the other hand that. And so maybe the answer is, maybe I need to get consultation and get feedback from someone who's got more expertise in this area than I do. So I think it's about sort of creating a process where we can not only make mistakes, but learn from our mistakes, and role model what we want our students to be doing, which is the ethical practice of like, hey, I made a misstep here. Let me see if I can make it right.
Yeah, to have that space to own it, and like you said, make it right, because that's a human thing to do.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy you said that. No, go ahead.
Oh, just really quick. Is it going to be quick? I don't know.
Just go ahead.
The other thing that I'm hoping supervisors do is, I think we often wait for supervisees to bring up hard conversations, particularly around things like race or things like bias, or sexism, whatever. Like, and my wish for supervisors, and this is how I try to teach my students and train my students in my clinic, is it's our job to open the door. Always, because we are in the powerful part of that power dynamic. And so students won't always feel like they can talk about things unless we're bringing it up first. And there's so much riding on our evaluation as supervisors for, as we know, for years often, that trainees will have a vested interest in keeping the relationship strong, which sometimes means they will not want to bring up the hard topics, and they shouldn't have to. So that's my other hope for supervisors.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because it's like you felt my energy with the next question. And what I was going to follow up with is, I think something my colleagues and I, like people in my class, or like, I'm campus co-chair of like Division 45, and something that really comes, thank you. Something that really comes up in our like monthly, like, meetings that we have, or like processes spaces that we have in like both spaces is, our role in this space, and how at the end of the day we are a trainee of color, and how we're afraid that even if we do bring stuff up, we're thinking about, will they write us a letter of recommendation? Like, they get to decide where we're going for like internship, and like, support us and things like that. And so I think what happens, in most of these situations is you feel really othered, and then you keep quiet because you really don't, first of all, you don't have the safe space to kind of share what you want to share. And then you feel like even if you do, then it'll be like weaponized against you or held against you. So I guess I want to understand, students like me and like my other colleagues, or like other students who are in this program, in the field of psychology, how can we cope and like advocate for ourselves in situations like that?
Such great questions, Pooja. And I'm gonna call in my friend and colleague Ariane Miller here, who this is really her area, is self-care for graduate students, and we've done a presentation on self-care for queer and trans graduate students of color. And I think the self-care that's required for people who experience oppression, I think self-care is required regardless of how you walk through the world. I think self-care is required plus if you are a student who experiences oppression, because the mental and emotional consequences of having to navigate systems that were built to exclude us are sometimes they feel subtle, sometimes they feel acute, but in my experience, they feel cumulative. And so when students ask me like, well, how do I cope with that? I think first is just to know that like, this is not a coincidence, like the thing that you are experiencing that you're describing, Pooja, that should I stay quiet? Should I just, try to put my nose to the ground and move forward? Like that is an experience that it comes from somewhere. And it didn't start with you. And I think that's the first thing to hopefully help kind of like normalize for students of color that this is a systemic issue that affects you. It affects people individually, but it's a systemic problem. And my next hope would be that students would find their communities, their people, whether or not they're in their program or on their campus. And that's where I think as a field, we could be doing a lot. There are lots of things we could be doing better. I think particularly, when I think about my work with the Asian American Psychological Association, that, I think we could be doing better about helping to hold up the people who feel like they're looking for us, but they don't know how to find us yet. They don't know how to make the connection yet. And so that feels like kind of like a within group comment, that we could be doing more there. And so that even if people are isolated on their campus or in their program, that they're not isolated in the profession. And so those are like there are lots of other things we could talk about, but those are two big things for me. It's like, this is happening for a reason that didn't start with you. And let's help find a community that can help hold you up when you need that.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate those tips, just with lived experiences, navigating these nuances, and also, from like people I go to school with, or like, like my broader community, like through APA, that like I collaborate with it. And I feel like we don't have enough of these conversations, and that could be like a whole podcast series on its own. But I really appreciate you sharing that perspective, because even with my clients, I'm always like, you need to be taking care of just who you are, like, every day of your life. But I never thought of it like what you just said today, where it's like, hey, if your identities intersect in like these so many different ways, it's like self-care plus. And I really resonate with that perspective. And, it got me thinking of, we have to take like a social cultural like elective class in the PhD program. And I'm currently taking a class on disability. And something that we spoke about in our class yesterday was, like people who are like professionals and students who are like neurodivergent, or like who do live with disabilities, how that also comes into the power play in these spaces. And
absolutely.
The nuances that come with that. So it made me think of that.
Yes. There's so much more work to do. And I think part of what I'm taking from what you're saying, Pooja, is that like it is a required practice for us to stay humble. And, like no matter how much the field or the magical piece of paper, two magical pieces of paper, one that says that you're a doctor, and then the second one that says that you can practice independently, that we stay the course, we stay the course of like knowing that I'm going to make mistakes. What mistakes am I making? How can I do this better? And I can just imagine how much better our field would be when we can admit that we're not great at some of this.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's really important to maintain that cultural humility.
Yeah, and that actually admitting that makes us better psychologists.
Yes.
Like I think the idea that like we are always right because we have so many years of experience, or that we have X amount of authority, is like feels like a very individualistic, achievement oriented, Eurocentrically focused kind of way of being. So, when we talk about like something like authenticity, to me, authenticity is like, yeah, let's step into that really uncomfortable space where we know we didn't get it right and get used to it, because it happens whether or not we're acknowledging it. For me, the cultural responsiveness is like, can I be with that experience and not let it limit me? Can I be with it and move beyond it? Not let it keep me stuck. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck, is when we know we messed up and then we just try to avoid it because it's too uncomfortable.
Wonderful. Wise words. Thank you, kaibigan. And also, just to as an added to that, I'm wondering, what do you think are, what steps should be taken in order for us to have this cross-racial ethnic solidarity, and also to be, how can we be better accomplices with, various racial, ethnic, and any marginalized communities?
I'm going to give credit to Karen Tsuyomoto for a couple of different reasons. One, she's been the model for me, and I suspect for others, for the ideas about what leadership can look like if it's not tied to pedigree. And so I want to give Karen credit for that. And I also want to give Karen credit for her work on allyship research, which I think has inspired my own. I think in practice, a lot of the things that I've talked about apply to cross-racial allyship and solidarity. That it's probably one of the first social justice practices that I really became familiar with, is like, how do I move on when I make a mistake that I didn't mean to make, but it impacted someone? I can name easily 5 of the most cringeworthy examples of my own missteps over the last, 20-ish years doing social justice work. And it hits almost the same as it did the day that I made it. And so I think part of really effective cross-racial work is, especially when we are in positions of power, as we are within cross-racial work, or we might be within cross-racial work, especially if it's intersectional, that we can own our impact. And I think doing queer and trans social justice work among people of color has inevitably been cross-racial. And it has been important for me to acknowledge that, the experiences of my Black, queer, and trans siblings is not the same as mine as an Asian American Filipinx person. Or that, for trans femmes and trans women of color, they are not the same experiences as mine as a trans masc non-binary person of color. And so I think being able to hold all of those different multiple truths at once, that different kinds of power dynamics are happening at the same time as we are doing work together, and creating a process with someone else where we can talk about, how are we doing this right, and where could we be doing it better, and how can I be doing it better? I think those are some of the things that cross-racial social justice work has taught me.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Definitely resonate with a lot of what you shared, and it's something that we're also just trying to, like, something that I also try to bring about, like Dr. Donna and I, in the work that we're doing through the task force, or even in my position at school and like leadership positions there, like how do we kind of address these things? And you need, in order to get to a place of healing, you have to cross that like feelings of like feeling uncomfortable and things like that. So I feel like you really reminded us today how those feelings of discomfort can just look in so many different areas in academia, right? From like teaching to research to clinical supervision and, social justice as leaders. And as I am a student, I always like asking my guests this one last question. So in thinking about what you have told your younger self when you began your journey as a psychologist, we'd like to know, what words of wisdom do you have for graduate students currently in academia, graduate students getting into academia, and BIPOC students getting into leadership? Anything you wish you had told your younger self back then that you can tell us now?
Ooh, that's a good one. My younger self. I think I'd want my younger self to know that however I'm thinking and feeling, especially if it's related to feeling like outside of something or not, that that not only is that there for a reason, but also that I'm not the only one. And as soon as I can, to find people who are experiencing something similar, because that's really where I felt like I found the most fulfillment and meaning, especially in the when I was a graduate student specifically. And I think if I had known that what I had to say was important, I think that would have helped too. I think I had an inkling of that. I just didn't know like what form it would take, X amount of years later. And that like just staying true to my own experience as a person of color and as a queer and trans person of color was going to be the most important, no matter what. All the thoughts, all the feelings, all the hard experiences, all the good ones, that the only thing that I could really do at the end of the day is stay true to myself and my family and my community.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for making time and for being here today. I wish we didn't have to end, because this was amazing and we could talk all day, but thank you so much. It was such an honor to have you here today with us.
And I know that Lou and Jeannie are here in spirit. So
absolutely. Oh, there's 6 and 7 for absolutely. So happy to be with you both, and I can't wait to see you in person whenever we get to make that happen.
Yes, can't wait.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for tuning in to our podcast today. We hope you enjoyed the episode. For more information about today's guests and their social media links, you can click on the description links of the episode. Pooja Mami Dana and Dr. Donna Demanarig host this podcast. Our podcast team includes our podcast interns, Alexis Rios from the University of North Texas in Denton, Texas, and Petra Zadroga from Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts. We also want to acknowledge our production team, David DeVito and Rachel Sheffer.
If you would like to know more about us or to watch video clips of this interview, then follow us on Instagram at APADiv45_Presidential Task Force, on Twitter at APADiv45_Coakley, or on YouTube and Facebook at Dr. Kevin Coakley, APA Division 45 Presidential Task Force.
Strength and solidarity. There's strength and solidarity.